The engines on the Fat Controller's railway loved Halloween. From the kids who dressed up as witches and goblins, to the pumpkins which sat upon the station. However, what they all enjoyed most were the scary stories they would all tell to each other. And it said that on the date of the accident, the faceless engine returns to the rails in search of a face that fits just right. "Ooh, spooky," said all the other engines. "You're all scared of that measly story. I've heard worse." "I wouldn't get too cocky," chimed Duck, "or you might get scared by the ghost whistle again." Thomas just looked away in embarrassment. He didn't like being reminded of his incident at the smelters the year prior. "Well, does anyone else have a story they'd like to share?" There was a long pause, until Henry spoke up. "I actually have one I'd like to share." "Oh, great. Is it a story about the rain, or what about a lumberjack?" Thomas said cheekily. Henry just looked down at the ground, in deep thought. He then looked at Edward. "Do you think they're ready?" "It's up to you, Henry." "Gordon?" "You're the one telling it." "Are you gonna tell the story or not?" Thomas said impatiently. "All right, quiet down, Thomas, and let Henry bloody speak." A long time ago, on a railway far, far away there, was a small fleet of engines. They worked hard to keep the railway afloat. However, the work was getting too much, and the controller knew he needed a new engine. So, he decided to bring 3 on trial. Sadly, these 3 weren't the nicest of engines. They were arrogant and boastful. However, while 2 engines knew when enough was enough, the 3rd one didn't. He had no name, only a number. Some say this was the reason for his temper and arrogance, but nobody truly knows. He would always pick on the smaller engines and take out all his anger and frustrations on them. "Looky here, you little runt," Henry said in a raspy voice. "If you can't get my coaches to the platform in time, I'll make sure to push you into the sea. And I've noticed those buffers at the harbor are getting a little loose these past couple of days." Once he said this, the tank engine ran off and hid in the shed the rest of the day. The bigger engines, as well as the other trial engines, tried to tell him sense. "Stop picking on engines smaller than you," they would always say. But he took no notice. One day, a different tank engine was shunting in the harbor. His crew had left to chat with the signalman, and the little engine sizzled in the sun. Just then, he heard the all-too-familiar sound of trucks slowly moving along the line, and eventually, they began to speed up. The engine was horrified to see a long line of trucks that were rattling towards him. He blew his whistle long and loud, hoping help would come, but it was too late. The trucks crashed into him, sending him flying down the line. He tried to stop, but without a crew, he was powerless. The little engine then crashed through the buffers to the end of the pier, falling into the sea below. They made efforts to try to find the engine, but the cranes weren't long enough to reach the bottom, and the engine was lost forever. The other engines, as well as the controller, chalked it up to an accident. However, one of the big engines had been watching the whole time. Tell me, why were you leaving the harbor in such a hurry? He asked the nameless engine.
Well, I was running late, of course. I had a very important passenger train to pull.
And you expect me to believe that you, of all engines, would be running late? Tell me, why did you kill that engine? He shouted, alerting the other engine in the station.
I knew it was you. It was so bloody obvious,
called the other big engine. Chuckled the nameless engine.
Looks like you caught me. Yeah, I did do it. I honestly thought it was that other tank engine.
So because he was late bringing your coaches to the platform, you thought a suitable punishment was death?
If an engine can't do their job well and on time, then they aren't useful. They're just a waste of space. You disgust me!
The nameless engine just laughed.
If you dare tell anyone, I'll make sure you suffer a similar fate.
The two big engines just sat flabbergasted by what they had just heard. However, this didn't stop them from telling the controller what they were told. The controller, however, didn't believe them. There just wasn't enough evidence to prove their claims. What they didn't know was that someone had overheard everything they had just said.
I cannot believe you didn't believe us,
called one of the big engines. Well, can you blame him? We literally had no proof to support our claims.
I guess you're right.
Just then, they heard the sound of the nameless engine's whistle, blaring in the distance. They were horrified to see the nameless engine pushing a long line of tankers right towards them. They whistled and screamed for everyone to evacuate the station. They closed their eyes awaiting their fiery end. But the signalman managed to switch the points just in time, and the nameless engine was sent onto the far line into the yard. A massive explosion echoed out from the yard. The two big engines were horrified by what had just happened, and soon the oldest engine on the line raced into the station, asking what had happened. The two big engines explained everything, and that's when they realized the original tank engine, which gave the nameless engine so much trouble, was stationed in the yard. They ran in to find the yard had been engulfed by a massive inferno, and within were the burned, rusted remains of the tank engine and the nameless engine. Once the fire was put out, the tank engine was raced to the works. The workmen tried to save him, but they were too late. He was too far gone. The nameless engine, shockingly, managed to survive in the end.
Sir, you must believe me,
he cried.
I was only shunting them when they got away from me. I was only trying to stop them, sir.
I am tired of your excuses, Henry said, mimicking the controller.
Too many things have happened since I brought you here, and I cannot take it anymore. Once you are repaired, you are to take a passenger train up the line. Then you are to leave my railway. What?
Cried the nameless engine.
You can't do this to me. I've put countless days into this useless railway to improve it. I've had enough of your excuses.
The controller then turned to one of his big engines.
Please take this engine to the works. I cannot look at him any longer.
It isn't clear what exactly happened next, but what can be said is that the passenger train the nameless engine would take would end in disaster. It was a dark and misty night when the Nameless engine backed onto his train. The two big engines sat in the yard, glad to know they would never see him again. Soon enough, the guard blew his whistle, and the Nameless engine set off for its ill-fated journey.
What happened next?
Stammered Percy. Henry just looked down at the ground. It isn't 100% sure what happened after that. They only ever got one man's testimony. However, the authenticity of it isn't clear.
Well, what did he say?
Thomas asked, trying to seem brave. The man said that as they traveled down the line, the mist had grown worse, and by the time it cleared, they realized too late they'd been sent off the main line and onto an old branch line.
Bloody hell, we're on the branch line!
Called the driver. Up ahead, the line curved around a cliff face, and the line of which had been blocked by a landslide. The driver went to apply the brakes, but nothing happened. The Nameless engine began to laugh. He then crashed into the rocks, plummeting down the cliff, cursing out the controller as he fell. And it said, on the date of that accident, he runs again, whistling and laughing as he plunges into the gap. Henry then let out a long whistle. The other engines jumped as Edward, Henry, and Gordon just laughed. Oh, once scaredy engines, always scaredy engines, remarked Henry cheekily. Well, I never knew you could tell such a story, Henry.
That story wasn't real, right, Henry?
Murmured Percy. Oh, of course not. I only made it up on the spot to give you lot a good fright. Percy just let out a sigh of relief and went to sleep with some of the other engines.
You did good, Henry.
Thanks, Gordon. I just... Don't you think we should tell him?
Tell who?
The three engines jumped, shocked to see Thomas still wide awake and listening.
Well, go on. Spit it out.
Henry looked at Edward.
I think it's time we tell him,
Edward said glumly.
Alright, you three are really starting to creep me out.
Thomas, do you remember when I told Percy that story was made up?
Yeah, it was only 10 minutes ago.
Well, you see, I sorta, lied. Thomas was taken aback by this.
So you're telling me an engine really did kill his passengers? Henry, how the hell did you hear about this?
Thomas, that wasn't the only part I lied about. I also lied about its location, too. It didn't take place on some old, faraway railway. It happened here. Thomas looked at the ground, shocked by what he had just heard. But soon, he began to laugh. Oh, Henry, if this is your way of getting back at me, you have to try harder than that.
Thomas!
Shouted Edward.
Does the number 98462 mean anything to you?
Thomas thought for some time before he finally spoke up. I think an engine held that number, but there was no engine here that had that number, at least from what I can recall.
Bloody hell, he isn't getting it.
Getting what? All you three have been doing is asking me a bunch of pointless questions. Thomas, Edward said sadly. That tank engine that was killed in the explosion, that was you. What? You were the first engine purchased to help build the railway. We managed to get you the works in time, and by the time they had finished, James had already been purchased, and you lost all of your memories. Haven't you ever thought about why you look nothing like your brothers and sisters? Or why you have no memories of your life before Sodor? Thomas sat in silence as the realization truly sank in. So, those weren't dreams after all. What dreams? Edward said comfortingly. I've been having these dreams of other engines I've never seen before. Tell me, does the name Alberts mean anything to you? Edward then looked to the ground, holding back the tears.
That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. That was the tank engine 98462 pushed into the sea.
All the engines went silent. Do you really think 98462 killed them on purpose? Or were they really accidents? The engines just stared silently at the sky, thinking about the story of the Nameless engine.